Good afternoon. My name is Frank Gaffney. I am the president and CEO of the new organization, Save the Persecuted Christians, and I'm delighted to be hosting this important effort to bring to bear the collective energies and concerns of people representing faith communities of every stripe who have come together to address a problem that has been put into particularly sharp relief lately as a result of the massacres of Christians in Sri Lanka, in the sense that that attack and the story that is behind it, namely that we have learned the government of Sri Lanka actually knew that an attack was imminent. They knew the targets of the attack, the churches in Colombo. They knew the day of the attack, and they did nothing to prevent it. They didn't even warn the people who were the intended targets of the attacks. And what this speaks to us working specifically on the crisis of truly unprecedented proportions with respect to Christians around the world is that they are being singled out for persecution, and the persecutors believe they can engage in it with impunity. And tragically, to this point, that's basically right. And of course, it's not just Christians that are now being persecuted in many countries around the world. It is a problem that fundamentally is described as intolerance and an indifference to religious liberty in more countries than one can imagine. This reality is being documented by a number of both governmental and private sector institutions. And thanks to their work, we have a sense of the crimes against humanity that are taking place, truly unspeakable in character and mind-boggling in magnitude. That reality has prompted our organization, Save the Persecuted Christians, to believe that it is time for us to do something beyond, important as it is, trying to help alleviate the suffering of the victims of such religious persecution. That it is time for us to begin holding those who engage in such persecution accountable for doing so. And more to the point, to create costs to them for engaging in this kind of barbaric behavior. It is clearly a challenge to do that. It will take many people, both in government and in the American public more generally, to come together to try to begin holding the persecutors accountable and creating costs to them for their crimes against humanity. Something we believe that can be done immediately, though, is to hold people accountable for what is, as a practical matter, the enabling of persecution of Christians and others. And in that category, of course, are, among others, prominent law firms and lobbying entities in this town. K Street is just a couple of blocks away, and it is, of course, known internationally to be the denizen of the lobbyists who help shape American policy. And one of those particularly prominent organizations is Squires, Patton, Boggs, a law firm that both does legal representation and lobbying, both in this country and in many other places around the world. And as it happens, until very recently, Squire Patton Boggs represented one of the most odious of the persecuting nations, the government of Sudan. They just dropped them as a client at the end of last year, to their credit. Unfortunately, they are still representing the government of the People's Republic of China. They are still representing the government of Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They are still representing the nation of Qatar. And it's just come to our attention in the past 24 hours that they are also representing the Palestinian Authority, an entity that is also, as with Sudan, as with Saudi Arabia, as with China, as with Qatar, engaged in heavy persecution of Christians and to varying degrees others. So our purpose here today, and I'm alas obliged to be someplace else shortly, so I'm basically just going to kick this off with a word of welcome to all of you, both those of you here, for whom we're very grateful, as well as those of you who are joining us through the miracle of live streaming, to talk about what we think Squire Patton Boggs must do. Must do. To end its involvement, whatever its intention is, its involvement in the enabling of persecution of Christians and others, by doing what they've done just recently with respect to Sudan, with respect to the other clients that are still in the business of persecution and that they are still in the business of enabling. Namely, to end their relationship with Communist China, with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, and with the Palestinian Authority. I pray that this will be their response to a letter that we have sent to them, signed by dozens of organizations, 46 to be precise. Organizations representing people of faith, just about every faith that I can think of, who are concerned about what Squire Patton Boggs is doing and who are joining forces in this common purpose of getting them to cease and desist in the enabling of the persecution. I couldn't be more proud that a man whose life's work has both informed and inspired this immediate initiative is with us today. He is the author of quite a number of pieces of legislation, but most especially the Frank Wolf International Religious Freedom Act, whose 20th anniversary is being celebrated right now. And I couldn't be more proud that he is associated with this, that he was one of the first signers onto this letter, and that I know he will be among those who will be helping us both hold accountable the persecutors themselves and, indeed, the people who are helping them do this. Congressman Wolf, would you join us?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for attending. I guess the question is, why do we who sign this letter believe it's not appropriate to represent China and Saudi Arabia? If you were at the event on Monday, the U.S. International Religious Freedom Commission issued this report. It is so powerful and damning to what's taking place to many, many faith groups. In China is being designated as a country of particular concern, a CBC country that persecutes every religious group. The Catholic Church is being persecuted. Underground churches facing very difficult times. Catholic bishops are being persecuted. Catholic priests are being persecuted. Protestant pastors, hundreds of Protestant pastors have been arrested. Tibet, there is cultural genocide has taken place to Tibet. At that time, about 140 Tibetan monks and nuns have poured kerosene on their bodies, self-immolate because of what China is doing in the Tibet. The Uyghur Muslims, as of this moment that we're here, roughly 800,000 to some say up to 2 million Uyghur Muslims are in concentration camps or internment camps that are almost like Mao or Stalin or almost what the Nazis had. I had a grandmother, a Uyghur grandmother, come by and cry in front of me telling me that her grandchildren are being held in these internment camps. And there are also open-air prisons in the region, and the world must speak out, and no law firm should represent a country that is taking Uyghur Muslim children and women and putting them in internment camps modeled after what Mao and Stalin did. The Falun Gong. Many in the Falun Gong are being arrested and they're harvesting their organs. Basically what that means is they are killing them and they're selling their organs for a large, large profit. Many, many lawyers who are representing all of these denominations have also been arrested and taken away. And also, if you saw the testimony by Director of the FBI, Wray, several weeks ago, they are spying against our country and are funding these groups called Confucius Institutes, whereby the Dalai Lama could not be invited, or somebody from the International Committee for Tibet could not be invited. A Catholic priest from China could not be invited. A Protestant pastor from China could not be invited. A Uyghur, Reba Kadir, could not be invited. Next on Saudi Arabia. The Washington Post has covered the killing, the dismembering of Jamal Khashoggi. Why would any law firm represent a country that has done that to Mr. Khashoggi? They have published textbooks that are anti-Semitic and anti-Christian. Just look at the textbooks that the Saudis have been putting out over the years. Look at the recent mass executions that took place last week. 37 people beheaded, one of them a 16-year-old boy. And keep in mind, they have funded radical Wahhabism all over the world, from Indonesia to Albania to Sarajevo to many other places. And keep in mind, my former congressional district was Northern Virginia, and 15 of the 19 hijackers that were on the planes at 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. So the question is, how does a law firm represent and take money from countries that do this? Lastly, with regard to Qatar, I've been to Iraq a number of times in the last couple of years. And on the first trip, when we were there, we were up in the Nineveh Plains region. And after I left every meeting, we had met with the Yazidis. And of course, as you know, at this very moment, there are 3,000 Yazidi women and girls that are still missing. And the Yazidis have suffered so much. At the end of every meeting, I would ask, who is helping ISIS? And the answer that came back over and over and over in almost every meeting was Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So we call on this law firm, and there are many good people in this law firm, we call them to drop China, to drop Saudi Arabia, and drop Qatar as clients.
Thank you so much. I'd like to invite Bob Fu, founder and president of China Aid, to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Didi. Thank you, Frank, for the leadership on this issue. Thank you, Congressman Frank Wolf, for your steady leadership on this issue to highlight the religious persecution around the globe. I just want to really ask a few questions to this particular law firm, Square Patent Box. Lawyer Wang Quanzhang, who was arrested, disappeared, secretly tried, and secretly sentenced almost 4 years ago. No family member, not a single his colleague or lawyer that his family hired had ever seen him. Nearly 4 years. And his wife had been persecuted, dragged, and even beaten for simply asking, "Where is my husband?" Lawyer Gao Zhisheng, a twice nominated nominee of Nobel Peace Prize, was disappeared again in August 2017. Nearly 2 years already. Nobody knows where he is being held. These are just lawyers, your fellow lawyers. Square Patent Box, your fellow lawyers. How could you beautify a communist regime, a Chinese regime, when your fellow lawyers like Wang Quanzhang and Gao Zhisheng were brutally treated, tortured like this? Pastor Wang Yi, for simply preaching a simple message of the gospel of Jesus Christ, along with over 300 of his congregants since December 9th, were detained, arrested, and so far we already documented among the 300, clearly including Pastor Wang Yi and his wife, over 80 of them were physically, mentally tortured under videotape in order to record their false confession against this Presbyterian house church pastor with whom President Bush met in 2006. Pastor Zhang Cao received 7 years imprisonment for simply setting up 16 schools for 2,000 children in the Burma area of Kachin for these minority groups. 7 years as a Chinese American pastor. Catholic bishop from Hebei, Bishop Su Zhiming. Where is Su Zhiming? After he was arbitrarily imprisoned since 1997, the last time he was seen in public or in a hospital was 2001. Since then, totally disappeared. Nobody has seen him live or death. This 42-year-old mother of two, Saira Guli, from Xinjiang, a Kazakh minority from Xinjiang, had to escape to Kazakhstan in order to reunion with her two children and her husband after being forced to a concentration camp in Ili and witnessing 2,500 Kazakhs in that concentration camp alone. She's a Communist Party member. She's a civil servant. She could not bear that. For 4 months, she was there as an instructor. And for the first time, our reporter was able to interview her the horrible, horrible stories. Of course, as Congressman Wolf just mentioned, the war against the faith launched by President Xi Jinping has been marked as the worst year has reached the worst year in 2018. For the persecution against the Protestant Christians alone, according to our own report, last year, over 1 million Christians were under intensive persecution. And among them, at least 50,000 we documented as physically and mentally tortured. That's a real, dramatic increase compared even to the year 2018. Google has a motto used to be called, "Don't be evil." And then they changed to "Do the right thing." So I want to really ask the Square Pattern folks and anyone, any politicians, any other PR firms in this town, ask your conscience. Really ask your conscience at night when you hear these stories, like you just mentioned, and my colleagues, friends who are going to mention later on. We're not asking you, really, even at this time, to do the right thing in that sense, because you are trying to make some money, but just don't be evil. Don't be embedded with the evil when they are practicing such, horrific crimes against humanity. A genocide is clearly happening in Xinjiang. So that's the thing I just want to ask the leaders from Square Pattern folks to do. I hope your conscience, and I hope God, who continue to inspire, will make you make the right decision to do not do evil. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And I also want to thank you for your service on the board of Save the Persecuted Christians. It is my great pleasure to invite Faith McDonald, who is the Director of International Religious Liberty Program and the Church Alliance for the New Sudan from the Institute on Religion and Democracy, to speak about the harm that has been done over the years by Squire Patton Boggs' representation of Sudan. Though they did just recently drop them as a client, they have a history of serving them.
Thanks very much, Dee Dee and Frank Gaffney, and thank you to my friend Congressman Frank Wolf, who is my great hero. Thanks all for being here. Yes, so I'm going to talk about a country who Squire Patton Boggs has retired from, but there's plenty to say, and as much as I would like to believe that they actually stopped representing them for conscience reasons, out of the goodness of their heart, I tend to think that it wasn't that. I tend to think that it was because, well, they got some things accomplished that they wanted to. And secondly, Sudan's been a little hard on money lately, so maybe they weren't getting the $40,000 a month or whatever it was that they had been getting for the last 14 months, or is it 16 months? They started representing Sudan in June of 2017, and they finished in October of 2018. So you can work out the math yourself. I thought I figured it out on my fingers, but I may have gotten it wrong. So that again, we've got another horrific country like China, like Saudi Arabia, like Qatar. And when you talk about Saudi Arabia and Qatar, with some things in common with those countries. So I want to address two things. I want to address the human rights violations and religious persecution that Sudan has been responsible for, that Squire Patton Boggs had to be fully aware of while they were representing them. And then secondly, another ramification, Sudan's connection to global jihad, to terrorism around the world, and how that is something that Squire Patton Boggs was enabling if they were lobbying for this government, the National Islamic Front regime. I'm, as well as being part of Save the Persecuted Christians and directing the Religious Liberty Program at the Institute on Religion and Democracy, I'm part of a coalition called Act for Sudan. And back in September of 2017, just after we started learning about Squire Patton Boggs lobbying for Sudan, we put together a letter that was signed by 130 Sudanese scholars, human rights organizations, and others, and said to Squire Patton Boggs, your firm is lobbying for the government of Sudan, a regime comparable to the Nazis, whose leaders are indicted for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. At the hand of your client, over 3 million Sudanese have been killed and over 5 million forcibly removed from their homes. So we, on our letter, we have representation from the marginalized people groups of Sudan who have been so persecuted and whose human rights have been ignored by the government of Sudan. And that would include people from the far north, from Nubia, from the Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile State and Darfur, and from eastern Sudan, from Bijaland. Those are what we call the marginalized people groups, even though they comprise most of the country. And we have today, I just want to acknowledge my friends, Arkamani Babakir, who is from Blue Nile State, whose people right now are still under attack by the government of Sudan, and my friend Jahan Deng, who is from the country of South Sudan, which, as you will know, things were so bad, and the intense persecution and extermination of Southern Sudanese was so bad that that we actually helped them to secede from Sudan. So over 2.5 million died during that particular struggle. Squire Patton Boggs, you know about this. You knew this was happening, and that, as the late Dr. John Garang said, the leopard doesn't change its spots. This was a government that was too deformed to reform. So when Squire Patton Boggs, in its explanation, talks about helping this government to reform and helping them to do things, they could not help this particular government to reform. Now, I just also want to mention another reason why it's not a good idea for Squire Patton Boggs to have represented the government of Sudan. At the very time that they started representing them, June of 2017, there was a meeting of the top echelon of the government of Sudan that was, the minutes were leaked to me, so here's the cover page from that particular document. And the people who were in that meeting included President Bashir, who has recently been overthrown, but also many of the people who are still in power as part of the military council, who are no different from President Bashir. I would hope that, seeing that this is the case, that this is the result of your lobbying, Squire Patton Boggs, that you would not come back and ever lobby for them again, because nothing has improved at this point, except that the people are determined that they will have freedom. But just to tell you a few things about what they said at that meeting. As an Islamic movement, we have strong relationship with Muslim Brothers and Hamas leadership because we originally come from the Muslim Brotherhood organization. We have strong attachment with Muslim Brothers because they supported us to maintain our Islamic government in Sudan. through their support, we've been able to overcome many international and regional conspiracies. What is happening to Qatar, they mentioned Qatar there, is the action of targeting Muslim brothers and Islamic organizations in the world. They talk about what they have done to help all of the terrorist organizations that we know about in that document. They talk about helping the Islamic State to make its way through East Africa since they have been pushed out of the Middle East. They talk about fooling the United States. So did they fool you, Squire Patton Boggs, or did you know what was going on? I would ask Squire Patton Boggs, look at this government, look at what's happening, look at how many people are now in the streets saying, we don't want this government anymore. There's nothing that this government can do to be reformed. We need a new government. Look at that and see what you were responsible for enabling. And just as you continue to enable China and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the Palestinian Authority. So I would ask that all of us together would continue to put pressure on Squire Patton Boggs and to put pressure on anyone, as my friend Bob Fu said, who is lobbying for evil regimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith. I would like to also introduce Mr. Saleh Hudayar from the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement to come and speak about what is happening with the Uyghurs in China and give his own personal testimony. And after that, we'll take some questions from the media if you would like.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having this event. My name is Salih Hudayar. I am an Uyghur from Chinese-occupied East Turkestan. I'm here because I believe that Squire Patton Boggs should know who it's doing business with. As many of us might have already known, the Chinese Communist Party currently is arbitrarily detaining upwards of 3 million people, according to the UN Committee, United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And amongst those 3 million people are over 100 members of my immediate and extended family. It isn't just the Turkic Muslims of East Turkestan that are being targeted. You have Christians, Buddhists, and practitioners of Falun Gong that are being targeted and persecuted as well. In fact, according to the Black Book of Communism, Crimes, Terror, Repression, the Chinese Communist Party is responsible for the mass murder of an estimated 70 million or more people since its founding. The radical cadre in Beijing continues its brutal reign of oppression and murders innocent people as we speak. And the people who are enabling them need to be held responsible. I hold here Squire Patton Boggs' latest FRA filing, and on page 13, here it clearly states that Squire Patton Boggs is advising China on human rights. Is Squire Patton Boggs advising China that it's okay to subject people to organ harvesting, to torture, and to all other means of unimaginable abuses? Is it advising China to engage in genocide? My message to Squire Patton Boggs is this: I am a victim of your business with Communist China, and so too are the millions of innocent people in East Turkestan, along with millions of innocent people across China and across the world. What the Chinese Communist Party is doing to the people of occupied East Turkestan is analogous to what the Nazis did to the Jews and other peoples. By representing the interests of Communist China, Squire Patton Boggs is knowingly and willingly aiding the genocide of an entire people. Thus, we call on Squire Patton Boggs to immediately stop representing the criminal, evil, genocidal Chinese Communist regime's interest, and to set an example for ethical business practices by upholding American values. We also demand a public apology from Squire Patton Boggs to the victims of its business transactions with China and other countries, and an immediate end to its collaborationist activities. Thank you, and God bless you.
So thank you very much for your time today. Are there any questions? Would you like to that you would like to have? Yes.
Josh Shepard with the Stream. Do you have an estimate of how much money in lobbying fees that this firm is bringing in annually from these foreign governments?
So from Qatar, they have a $15,000 a month retainer. From China, it's a I don't have it right in front of me, but it's right here. From Saudi Arabia, it's $100,000 a month, and I believe from China, $22,000 a month. But it's been going on for years and years. So you add it up. For Qatar, it's $4.5 million since 1994, $15,000 a month. So it adds up. Yes, Douglas.
Doug Burton, Queer News Network. So, can you tell us about other lobbying firms besides where that belongs to also taking contracts outside of because these countries often employ several firms?
Yes, and it's very deep. I would like Congressman Wolf to address the overall lobbying that's going on in Washington, D.C. with regards to many of these countries of persecution. Congressman? It is very deep. We are focusing on Squire Patton Boggs at this time, but there are many, many others, and we would hope that if Squire Patton Boggs takes this action to drop these clients, that others would follow suit as well.
During the Carter administration and during the Reagan administration, no law firm or public relations group in the city would have ever represented the Soviet Union. There's been a shift. And I think the fact that the different groups, what's taking place to the Uyghurs, it's so painful. When I even read about it, I kind of want to weep. This grandmother came in, so how could they not know? And there's a song that Simon and Garfunkel sang in Central Park called The Boxer. It says, man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. How can you disregard what's taking place to the Uyghurs? As this gentleman said, it's almost like Mao or Stalin or the Nazis. Bob Fu, who I've admired for years, talks about with regard to the Protestants. The Catholic Church has gone through such difficulty. He mentioned very briefly, I'll elaborate more. Bishop Sue took Holy Communion from a member of Congress. Bishop Sue was never seen again except for that one time. So there are others, but I think when you look at Qatar, I've been to Iraq a number of times since 2015, and Qatar keeps coming up over and over. Have you ever talked to a Yazidi women and girls? And so I don't know all the other firms that are, but we know here from China with regard to what's taking place to every denomination, taking crosses down from Catholic churches. Saudi Arabia, which is publishing anti-Semitic literature, creating hate. So I think this is indicative of what's taking place here in Washington. So Bob and them and the different groups have picked out with regard to this one firm, but there may very many be others. But clearly we would call on this firm, and I know there are many good people at the firm, to drop these as a client, to send a signal to the town that this is not appropriate.
Thank you very much. We do have a special guest in the room, and I'm going to let Father Andre Mahana come and speak about the Catholics in China and what they're experiencing. To have a few moments.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let us pray to Almighty God to allow justice, peace, and mercy to allow that the cries of the poor, the rejected, and the oppressed to make it to the conscience of this firm and many of the lobbies in the United States and in every powerful nation, to allow humanity to come together in a spirit of truth, that really we live our human dignity and our right to prosper and our right to be people and live with happiness in this world and honor the God that we love and cherish. In China, I've studied the history of Christianity. I studied the history of Islam. And in China, I have met recently with legal consultants, actually, who worked with the communist government, who were visiting here in China. I did also had the pleasure and the great honor to be part of the presentation that many of us were present in about a month ago about the danger of China. And what I want to share with you is we have to look at China's culture in a very precise and profound way, the culture of China. We have to look at it and realize that the perspective of human dignity, the perspective on the religious rights of a people are problematic inside the Chinese culture. Problematic in a way that it doesn't suit us, we as people from the West or people from the East. And somehow they always hide, justifying atrocities, murders, and killings, and not allowing religions. They call religion as a foreign concept in general. And I think with us people here, we do have a big work to do to make China understand that God is no foreigner to any culture. He's not. When it comes to Christianity, I want to tell you the early roots of Christianity goes back to the 3rd century. And the immediate roots of Christianity are actually Aramaic. I'm very thankful to Mrs. Lageson allowing me to speak about it, because it really opened my heart so wide when I understood that the first apostles who preached in China were Aramaic, were Syriac apostles. One of them is known as Abba Abraham, the Syrian, as a matter of fact. And then I knew that they were tolerated under the first emperor dynasty. And then after that, I believe in the 800, there was a major earthquake in China, and both Buddhists and Christians were completely massacred. And then with the Mongolians, when Muslims came, I did find out that if we have a chance with Islam, where Islam grew in a very spiritual way, away from political Islam, is actually in China. These are people who really looked to God and aimed and studied the Quran with verses that they actually try to appeal to a relationship with God away from political system. Because I don't think Chinese Muslims wanted to conquer the land. They did not want to govern China as a nation, as a continent. They actually upheld a spiritual Islam to a certain extent. And that's a good form for us to communicate with, to protect and to try to seek their understanding of how we can communicate with the larger Islam. And finally, I want to say about the Christians. I remember that there is a study in the 15th century that said once one of the popes sent a letter to the Catholics inside China, telling them, you have to convert the people. In fact, the emperor responded with a major, massive persecution that's still going till today. That's 500 years ago. A Catholic church living underground in China. That's the real time when it really started. Every time the Chinese government found out or felt that a religion becomes a national security danger to their culture, what they claim to be that culture, they persecuted. Today we actually have between 100 million to 200 million to 330 million Christians living in China underground. Many of them are Catholics. And I got this information that the Communist Party refuses to even give statistics, give number on the true religion numbers that live in China. I am most perplexed when it comes to understand what does the Catholic Church do to communicate faith with China. We all have seen what happened between the Vatican and the Chinese government. We still are demanding, asking clarifications, news about the truth of the deal that allows Christianity to be part of it living underground, part of it living above the ground. I urge and I ask the entire Catholic Church, the entire Christian community in the world, to seek understanding and try to liberate those millions of people who today they feel that they are crushed with no hope for ever returning, to be on a surface. They want to contribute, they want to be part of the Chinese life, they want to be promoters of a peace, of justice, and they want to be faithful citizens to China, as a matter of fact. And we must try to understand how we can help the church that is underground, the church that is the above ground, to come together away from whatever propaganda the communism might have for them, but we want them both to be one body, one shepherd, one church. And thank you so very much.
Questions from the audience? Yes, Scott.
Scott Morgan, I'm an independent security analyst specializing in African issues. If you look at the documents, another country that you will notice that they're representing is actually Cameroon. I was just wondering, considering that they were part of the groups that were effectively silenced any reporting about the murder of missionary Wesco in Cameroon last fall, and there are people struggling to try to make headway. So, and part of the question is not to be disparaging, is why wasn't Cameroon actually added to this letter? Because now you're starting to see traction on the Hill and with Yusuf, they're starting to pay a closer attention to Cameroon. And the second is concerning the amount of money that Squire Patton Boggs has gotten in the last year. That's money well spent by the Cameroonian government. We're talking about a government right now that's taking the effect right now that they have seized churches and converted them into both armories and military barracks. Nobody in this city has said a damn thing about it. Why? Because this firm, along with two others, have silenced. And that's something that they also should be held accountable for.
Thank you, Scott. Why weren't they included? We're finding out more and more about Squire Patton Boggs and what they're involved in every single day. And as I said, it's very, very deep here in Washington, D.C. with other law firms who are providing representation to these countries of persecution. And it is just very deep. They represent the Palestinian Authority, they represent Cameroon, they represent Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and China, and most recently Sudan as well. So we're eager to take the lid off and help expose this work to the public so they know about it. I'm sorry, Doug, did you have a question?
I have another question.
Okay, because I have one here as well. Okay, great, thank you.
My question is: are there any governments, including the United States, that have taken any action whatsoever to help these persecuted religious minorities? Any kind of legislative action, be it aid, sanctions, anything of any kind? And if so, what are they?
Sure. So in the United States, we have the International Religious Freedom Office at the U.S. State Department, headed by Ambassador Sam Brownback. We also have the International Religious Freedom Act, which is what started that office and provides for the oversight through both the U.S. State Department and also created the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF. And they just released their annual report on Monday. That is really essentially a watchdog from the United States on international religious freedom issues and human rights abuses. And we're very thankful for that. There are also options available to those who would like to hold the persecutors accountable through the Global Magnitsky Sanctions Act, and also visa bans and economic pressures that can be placed to bear on these countries of persecution, and that's Save the Persecuted Christians is eager to make it difficult and painful for these countries and non-state actors as well to participate in the persecution of Christians and other faiths as well. So thank you very much. And yes, also I would like to say that Hungary has been very good, and they have their own secretariat for Christians who have been persecuted as well. Yes, Bob?
In addition of all this mechanism, right now in both the Senate and the House, there is a similar bill with the bipartisan support called the Uyghur Human Rights Act, right? Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act. So it is like in the Senate, sponsored by Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Menendez from New Jersey, with already received 25 senators as co-sponsored. So in the House, the bill is also reintroduced in the committee level with wide bipartisan support, sponsored by Congressman Chris Smith and co-sponsored by Congressman Jim McGovern and the Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and also has endorsed. So we want to see this piece of legislation to be passed and hold those the Chinese the Communist Party's persecutor regime accountable, and along with the mechanism of a Global Magnitsky Act. Yeah.
Yes, Doug.
Okay, again, the Great News Network. Thank you for holding this. Thanks for holding this press conference here. You're in the National Press Club. I don't see many of my colleagues from the National Press Corps here. And I would like you to speak to the response that STPC has been getting from the national media so far, because these are very large numbers that Dr. Yu is talking about. These are very large numbers of people in other countries. And incidentally, my friend just mentioned Cameroon. In Nigeria, there was a big attack by an ISIS-related group just 2 days ago, Boko Haram, and there's not even any reporting in West African media on that. To what extent are you getting media in the United States to pick up on this issue, and how do you explain it?
Well, I would say that the Christian media has been very good at covering Save the Persecuted Christians and the issues that we are bringing to the people of the United States of America, really trying to wake everybody up to this issue. And I am starting to see a little bit of movement in that regard, especially with something as horrific as Sri Lanka, the bomb attacks on Easter Sunday, and also what happened with Notre Dame in France. It brought to bear the many attacks, 1,000 attacks on Christian churches and cemeteries and places of sacred belief in France. So there are some things that the media cannot deny and has to cover. But truly, part of the reason why Save the Persecuted Christians exists is because the media is overall so silent on this issue. And we are hopeful that we will be able to engage the media more and more on this. Yes, sir. Josh.
Again, Josh Shepard with the stream. The letter mentions Speaker John Boehner as one of the figures who's associated with Squire Patton Boggs. Are there several of the speakers have mentioned how there are good people who are associated or affiliated with the law firm. Do you want to name other ones of them who are perhaps conservative or religious that are affiliated with the firm, and what your message is to them?
So there are others. I mean, it's a regular thing for members of Congress to leave office and head to the nearest lobbyist firm on Capitol Hill somewhere in Washington, D.C., downtown D.C. Lobby firms are looking for former members of Congress on a regular basis, and John Boehner is one of those examples. This particular firm is home to a number of former members of Congress. Trent Lott is one of them. Thank you very much. But we would like to see. It's okay, fine, if they want to go work for a lobbying firm. Everybody has an opinion about that. I think it's what my personal view on it doesn't really matter. But to be associated with a firm like Squire Patton Boggs that has a long history, back to 1969, of lobbying for countries such as the ones that we have pointed out in our letter, then to be associated with them after having served the people of the United States in such a high office, and to essentially turn your back on the United States and everything it stands for with regards to religious freedom and human rights, and to then go and stand for a firm such as Squire Patton Boggs that is known for representing these countries of persecution. It's a betrayal, I believe, of the people of the United States of America and the trust they put in them.
It's already widely reported that the former vice president, presidential candidate, Senator Joe Lieberman, publicly acknowledged he has been working for this Chinese telecommunication company who was under sanction of the United States called ZTE as his security inspection kind of leader in order to convince the U.S. government not to continue the sanction. That's a really shock, a shame, especially a Jew who knows, I think, should know better that ZTE has been used by the Chinese government to conduct spying, with their technology. If we believe what FBI Director Wray said last Saturday at the Council on Foreign Relations, that the Chinese Communist regime posed the biggest spying threat to the United States of America. And former Vice President Biden, now the kind of who declared the candidacy for the presidential election, his son is working for Huawei. Everybody knows what Huawei is. Perhaps the world's largest kind of telecommunication spying machine for the Chinese Communist regime. So I think these facts needs to be further exposed, and they need to be asked and held accountable. Whose interests are they really representing right now?
I want to invite also our friend from the Blue Nile to, I'm sorry, Akumu? Yeah, Akumari. Akumari Babikur. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Yes, I want to send the message for the happening in Sudan now, because the military, our people protesting demonstration. Until now, the military fighting with him because the Islamic Brotherhood until now try to come back again to cover, to take this power over. We in Sudan, we don't mind. Is the military for homeland security, border protecting. We can deal with him. We can be. This is our response to stay with the military to save our country. But the Islamic brothers, this like international doesn't need what's the name the Sudan be safe. He took it over what's the name to try to what's the name gathering all the Islamic brothers to come back to Sudan. We don't need we cannot wait until this gathering again terrorists to come to Sudan like Umar al-Bashir make 30 years with the Islamic brothers. Yeah, this message for the military to Sudan, I want to tell him, come down, stay with these young ladies in Kandakas protesting for the peace of Sudan. It saves the country because the Islamic Brotherhood doesn't help you for your country. But after, when you do like that, it's going to be, again, civil war. Civil war is you damage your country, and then you lose your country, and then the Islamic country or Islamic brother doesn't have a country to, you can be a refugee or you can be something like that. This message I want to just send it to our military in Sudan. Thank you. What's the name? The Islamic Brotherhood is be too far or get out for this place. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes. Great. Another signer in the room? Yes. So the people who have been speaking today have all signed on to the letter. And Ibrahim, if you could introduce yourself and what organization you're with, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ibrahim Ahmed. I'm the director of the BIJA Organization for Human Rights and Development, and I advocate for the Sudan people rights more than 20 years. And I'm so glad to see Mr. Wolf, and we appreciate the great support that we get from Frank Wolf when he was in the Congress and his followers. So I'm so sorry for the late coming because I got in traffic and, for other reasons. But I'm glad at least I catch some time to be there. First of all, I want to thank, all the great efforts to save the Christians and to save the innocents all over the world that facing tortures and killing from the Islamists and the fundamentalist groups. For example, maybe many of my friends from Sudan, they mentioned what happened in Sudan and how the Christians, they respond very strongly to stop the genocide in Darfur, the genocide in Nuba Mountain, genocide in South Sudan, the massacre in East Sudan, Blue Nile, all over Sudan. So I'm so glad to be here and thank all the efforts that done to help the Sudanese people. And as my friend Abdullah he mentioned, we struggled almost more than 50 years since the Sudan independence in 1956 in order to change the mentality of the Sudan, the Khartoum government, not to torture the people based on the religion, based on the culture, based on the ethnic. So whatever we face it in Sudan since 56 until now, it is the elite groups in the north that they support it from the petrodollars countries in the Gulf. All of them, I'm not saying specific one, all of them, they agree about that they marginalize the Sudan people in their homeland, either in Eastern Sudan or South Sudan or Blue Nile, Nuba Mountains, and all over. But we suffer from military and military government and Islamist government, but it's still the faces change, but the ideology and the policy are the same. And I know many of you they observe what's happening right now in Sudan. That Bashir stepped down, but it is a long way because we have war of ideas, war of policy wise, not just replacing faces.
Can you speak to what it means for a lobbying firm here in Washington, D.C. to support a regime such as Sudan for the amount of time that they have done?
Yes, that's a very good point. Thank you for that. And the lobbyists actually, I think we protest many times in the front of the square pattern. Mr. Wolf with us always, and because the lobbyists actually they provide blood injections to regime not to die. So it is more danger than the just like lobbying, like the same way like they're doing in the U.S. Lobbying for rights. Now they are lobbying to support criminals. They are lobbying to support killers. Whatever crimes they do, they don't care. Whatever they get the money. So we have like many groups they lobbies in the U.S., especially in Washington D.C., to get Sudan out of sanctions, to get Sudan out of the list of the terrorists, but they success in some point. But we believe that the U.S. people they will not, allow all those things happen in the future. So that's our hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And really, just to bring it back around again, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yes. Right. Well, they make it clear somewhat clear in their statements that really they're looking to open up doors at Congress and with the administration to be able to speak to for these governments to be able to develop relationships with our government and to really paint a pretty picture of these countries and to be able to obtain for them good deals. It's not all sanctions, obviously. There are Sudan is a specific case, but for Qatar, for Saudi Arabia, for China, many of the times they're just kept on retainer for any instance that they would need. Saudi Arabia specifically has been paying $100,000 a month just to keep Squire Patton Boggs on retainer at this point in time. So, yes, Father Andre Mohan.
I just want to add to this. Possibly, Christianity is dangerous in the world today. We have to give the benefit of the doubt. I always think in the alternative, do those lobbies know who they are serving? Whether they do or they're not, my job is to let them know you are serving an enemy who's killing life, who's killing freedom. We're not saying those lobbies probably are actively doing this knowingly. So far, we're giving them the benefit of the doubt. We're telling them, come up and speak to that. Say, how are you serving the cause of justice, of mercy? I simply think, after my researches, Christianity is dangerous in the 21st century. The moral stand of Christianity is dangerous. It seems like there is an enslavement need in the world. And it seems that persecuting Christians enables that enslavement to happen without anybody defending the poor, the oppressed, the rejected, the neglected. And any other religious group that stands for freedom, that stands for freedom of conscience, for freedom of religion, it seems they don't fit in that plan. And that's why I think there is a de-Christianization of the West, while there is a soft totalitarianism happening in the world at the same time. And I'm so proud and glad, like people like Congressman Frank Wolf, like people like Frank Gaffney, or people like any one of our coalitions or agencies, are actually trying to just bring the light on. We don't have an interest in a West that does not have the Judeo-Christian values. The minute the West leaves or becomes enemy with the Judeo-Christian values, I think that enslavement becomes an opportunity for major darkness, but it will be too late. So our hope is to save our Judeo-Christian principles of keep yelling for the rights of a stand for freedom, part of which is a freedom of religion.
Thank you, Father. I just wanted to finish up that, with regards to China, during the reporting period, they Squire Patton Boggs counseled the foreign principal on U.S. congressional matters, including monitoring, compiling information, and analyzing the potential legal and political impacts of legislation regarding matters of interest to foreign principals. And as Kyle pointed out, Saleh pointed out earlier, they counsel them with regards to human rights and other things as well. Did you want to speak to that, Kyle? Yeah.
Kyle Olbert with the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement. To your question, Squire Patton Boggs states here clearly in their FARA disclosure that they are advising the People's Republic of China on everything from the fiscal year 2019 appropriations processes to U.S. relations with Taiwan, Hong Kong, and North Korea. And we know that China is a major enabler of the North Korean regime, which itself is persecuting Christians, as well as cybersecurity, matters pertaining to the Asia-Pacific region and the South China Sea, where China is constructing artificial islands, as well as currency. And we know that China is manipulating its currency, and yet we have not designated them a currency manipulator. CFIUS, which is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, Squire Patton Boggs is advising China on that. Immigration, Tibet, and we know, of course, that the communist regime has been ruthless in its oppression of Tibetan Buddhists. And then, of course, human rights, trade, and sanctions legislation. So I would posit to you that it may very well be the case that the reason that Magnitsky Act sanctions have not been imposed on these atrocious human rights violators in the Chinese Communist Party is perhaps because Squire Patton Boggs is running defense for the People's Republic.
So we have Dr. Lily Singh in the room today as well, and I would like to introduce her. She was with the Falun Gong director, and would you like to say a few words, Doctor, about the Falun Gong and what they're experiencing? Here, you can come up here, please. She's one of the signers on the letter.
Falun Gong is spiritual meditation practice of the Buddha school. And it was once very, very popular and appraised by the Chinese Communist regime in 1990s because of its dramatic health benefits to millions of people, about 70 to 100 million people. But Chinese government afraid of the popularity and the fast growth of the group, and thinking it's a threat especially they want to control people's minds, and then they saw so many people practicing something beyond the communist ideology. So they thought this is a political competition or something like that. So started persecution in 1999. So this July marks the 20th year of the persecution, brutal persecution, including organ harvesting from innocent Falun Gong practitioners, forced organ harvesting, and sell it for big benefits, and very brutal. And to justify its persecution against the Falun Gong, and the Chinese regime launched a huge campaign to defame Falun Gong and to vilify Falun Gong, and labeled all kinds of ridiculous names, including so-called evil cult, such and such. But Falun Gong has never been listed on the Chinese official list of evil cult at all. We just gave it a label 3 months after persecution started, actually. So,
can you address what is it for? Why did you sign the letter, and what does it mean to you to have somebody such as Squire Patton Boggs represent China?
The things that I'm thinking as a Christian, the very good people, kind-hearted people. I know so many of them, and they are so good. And then, especially in China and the Guang Church, and many other religious groups, they have been brutally persecuted. And for many years, so I would like to show the solidarity with all of them, and every voice counts.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we're drawing to a close here. Just wanted to wrap it up that it's important that people of faith come together and stand for one another in solidarity. No matter where anyone is hurting, we are all hurting because of persecution for our belief in or our desire to express a belief. And so we just want to stand together with our persecuted brothers and sisters, no matter what faith they profess, or even if they profess no faith at all. That countries around the world should uphold individuals' right to this most fundamental principle and blessing that we have. And I really want to say that it's important that lobbying firms such as Squire Patton Boggs and others in the United States also uphold these important principles that we have here in the United States. That if we are promoting it as the United States of America into the world, that it behooves also some of our brightest minds from the United States who are found employed in these firms to stand firm with us on those principles of freedom and to promote them into the world. To take a paycheck from these countries that are violators of these most basic rights is a betrayal of everything we hold dear. And so I thank you for being here today. I thank you to all of our signers on our letters, and I really do hope that we are able to continue to lift the lid and shine the light. Thank you.